You were actually the first person I heard that was speaking out and said, hey, I don't think we should be doing this to children.
You're circumventing their healthy sexual development into adulthood.
You can get pride and joy in oneself beyond sexual identity.
When it gets to the point that your school staff are talking to your child in private and telling them to keep secrets from you,
we can't let corporate interests create a world in which lies and deceptions are fed to people in the name of healthcare.
A lot of facilities have stopped using this drug to castrate those sex offenders because it's been deemed too cruel for use in that population. Which is very interesting because we're using it on perfectly healthy children like me.
I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. I'm here with Chloe Cole, who's an activist, and she has a very important message for everybody, not just parents, but young children as well, who might see this on social media and might get a chance to know Chloe and hear her story. We're covering, we just jumped right into it, but we're covering everything from, challenges around growing up on social media, challenges around puberty, which affects 100% of people. You're in your 20s now?
Yeah, I'm 20.
You're 20.
I turned 20 last year.
Okay.
In July. But since in my late teens, I've wanted to become a mother.
Yeah.
And I've also I had this thought very early on in my teens of if I ever become super rich, I want to I don't know anything about I'm not a scientist myself, but I think it'd be cool to fund reproductive sciences.
Yeah. It is. I do fund reproductive sciences.
That's so cool.
In the United States, though, it's really hard to do it. And
why is that?
I'll explain. It's actually overlaps with some of your story. In the United States, we have a scientific structure that really favors corporations that want to roll out therapies, treatments, vaccines, diagnostics very quickly, and they want to corner the market, and it's a very aggressive commercial environment. And what are they selling? They're fundamentally selling science, right? What comes out of science, translational science. And because of that, we have a history in this country as well, that the scientific publications and the scientists themselves get bought. They're kind of bought and owned. And then the institutions they work for and the labs they work for are bought and owned. And so to do real foundational science, we don't actually understand much.
Yeah. And it feels like there's a bit of stagnancy over the years in scientific development, especially in healthcare.
Oh, yeah. And even just women in general. Women have been overlooked in the medical field.
We're very misunderstood. We've just barely begun to scratch the surface, really, of how the female reproductive system works.
Yes. And in mouse models, so we talk about mouse models for testing and experiments, there weren't even female mice being used until just recently, just within the last 15 years, because female mice were considered harder to work with because they go through cycles. And so when you're testing a drug on a mouse and you're trying to understand...
Do mice also menstruate?
Yes. Yeah. Well,
I didn't know
do they? Actually, that's a great question. I know that they have ovulatory cycles. Now I'm wondering if mice menstruate. This is actually a really good question. Thank you, Chloe, for asking this question.
That'd be so jarring, just being a child, having a pet mouse, and then one day you wake up and it's just bleeding. And it's
I've had hamsters before, and I've had pregnant hamsters when I was a child.
I remember when my dog, I got my first dog when I was 12 or 13, I think.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that around the time that they ovulate, they bleed. So one day, I just saw blood all over the place, and it was what is going on?
Yeah, yeah. It's I mean, this is sacred. Like all of life and how life propagates itself is so sacred. And I just, went through my own journey with reproduction. And actually, you were telling
Do
me
you have
about
children of your own?
I have a daughter,
Uh,
a 6-year-old daughter. But I was reading about your story and I was like, oh my gosh, I was very similar when I was 12 years old. 8th grade actually was really hard for me. I was in Oakland at an Oakland public school. I come from a low income background. And I was just kind of, trying to figure it out. I was going through puberty and it was really hard and scary for me. And I was one of those young girls that would try to like tape my breasts or I'd wear like 3 sports bras and then I wanted to be anyone but myself. And I dyed my hair. I couldn't afford like proper hair dye, so I just got bleach because I wanted to be blonde.
I
And
did too. A lot of my siblings are naturally blonde because I'm not related to them in full.
oh, okay. Yeah.
And when I was really young, I was actually like, I wanted to be blonde and blue eyed and like even have glasses like they did, which
Uh-huh.
is like a common insecurity for people. And it was for them. And I just
Yeah.
like wanted to be like them because I looked up to them.
Well, I learned the hard way that the way hair bleach works is that it needs to
Dries it.
stay in for a really long time to get blonde. Otherwise, it just goes orange.
Yeah, and you have to do it
So,
over multiple sessions in order to like avoid damaging it.
and I didn't know any of this because I was 13 and I was hiding it from my mother. And I walk out and I'm like Carrot Top. Like I am just orange hair and it is so bad. And I have the braces then. And I mean, it was really tough. And I had my first heartbreak.
This is what I should have been doing at 13.
Well, there was no social media when I was going through puberty. So I imagine that kids today, and you're 20 now, you grew up with social media. Facebook came out when I was in college, and it was like life changing then. But I'm about to be 40, so I'm 20 years older than you.
Mm.
So your whole life has been in a world with social media. Not a lot of people over the age of 35 can really understand what that's like. They just fundamentally, like I can try to
Right.
imagine what it's
like
like.
a lot of my generation grew up with phones basically in their hands by like age 10.
Wow.
So
Was that you? Did you have a phone?
I got my first phone just before my 12th birthday,
Mm-hmm.
before my 7th grade year.
Yeah.
But a lot of my friends, like the more spoiled girls I remember, got their first iPhones when they were in first grade.
Yeah.
First grade, like they already had social media and everything.
First grade?
Yep.
Oh boy, that's scary. So let's work backwards. What are you working on right now? You're just sharing that you were out in DC. You got back yesterday. What you met Del Bigtree, I heard.
I want to work with the Maha movement.
You want to work for the Maha movement?
Yeah.
What inspires you about it?
Just the return to health. I think like beyond the gender issue, I feel like there's like a major. Most people in the United States are not healthy, either physically or psychologically. Like there are a lot of big changes that we need in order to become the greatest again. Like we need to start taking care of ourselves again.
Yeah.
And as it is right now, like the healthcare industry needs a major overhaul. Let's focus on diagnosis and prescribing and giving treatments that could be completely avoided and more focus on just health in general,
And wellness.
prevention, and also maintaining health.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's many parts of that. And, what is really at the core of the Maha movement is we can't let corporate interest create a world in which lies and deceptions are fed to people in the name of healthcare.
Yeah.
And as marketing, right? It's such a fine line between these private industries growing as businesses, delivering great therapies, but then also looking for new markets. And that's, that again, I think it'd be great to talk about your story a little bit because I didn't personally realize that there was an entire industry coming up around transitioning people from one sex to another sex. I didn't realize how big it had grown.
Mhm.
I was still, in my world of trans rights and activism,
Yeah.
we need to create a safe environment.
Yeah.
And so when I started hearing these stories, so what was happening in schools, and I saw the
I didn't even
pronouns.
know that while I was going through it.
Oh,
I didn't know that until
yeah,
I came until like very recently, like a few years ago, that like teachers
right.
are actually going behind parents' backs.
It's wild. I mean, that's what it's become. But I think you were the first round of kids that were really taken through transitioning because you're 20 now.
Not the first round. I believe that the experimentation on children began in the 80s or 90s,
Okay.
in European countries, and then was brought over here, I think, in the sometime in like the early 2000s, and then it
Hmm.
started to become really mainstream around the early 2010s.
Okay. Yeah. And that matches a bit with your timeline.
Mm,
Okay. So that's wild that it flew under the radar so long. And it's not that like I'm somebody who's out of touch with what's going on. I just didn't have kids of that age. And so I was hearing from parents as to what was going on in schools, and some of them were pulling their kids out of the schools because they were like, this is getting
yeah.
really
I mean,
crazy.
when it gets to the point that your school staff, the teachers are talking to your child in private and telling them to keep secrets from you, I don't think it's okay to keep them in that environment.
Wow.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what they're doing. They think that they have an authority over the parents that they don't,
Hmm.
that they know the child better than the people who love and know them best do.
Yeah.
And there's nothing okay about that.
No, and it's what much more widespread than it's coming out now, only just now, because brave people like you are coming out and telling these stories of like I was targeted, right? I was targeted. I was taken through this process, and let me tell you, it's not right. And it's got to stop, right? So is that where you are right now? Like in your bio, you're described as an activist. Do you see yourself as an activist helping the rest of this country understand what's actually happening?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that in order for the truth to come through and for justice to come, I think that there had to be victims in the first place. I think that there had to be people, there had to be um, kids and men and women who went through it talking about it,
Yeah.
and the parents who have gone through it talking about their personal testimonies, because that's what makes people activate the most, hearing personal testimonies like mine.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I like there were older women and men before me who were speaking out about detransitioning and their experiences going through that.
But were they
But they were
kids? They
no,
weren't kids. They
they were
were
adults.
grown
They were all
adults
adults who had done it as
that
adults.
had regrets as adults.
And I was
You
16, 17
Yeah.
when I started I was 16 when I detransitioned, and I was 17 when I started to speak out publicly. And during like in the middle of those things happening, like I felt like I was starting to see like a shift in how the media was
Mhm.
covering this, just very slightly. And I thought like this is probably a good opportunity for a voice like mine to jump in, because I don't this is such a like time I get the feeling that time is going to be of the essence. And how am I going to know that somebody else who was a kid is going to speak out about it? Like, why don't I start doing that?
And on
And it was
social
kind of
media,
scary, you
there's
know?
all one category
Yeah.
and there's no balance, right? On social media, especially TikTok, I hear
Mhm.
it's all for these. It glorifies the transitions, and there's no counterpart. There's no balance. There's no debate. It's just been very one sided, and that debate really started getting loud. You were actually the first person I heard that was speaking out as someone who went through it as a child and said, "Hey, I don't think we should be doing this to children." So this is what I think is really scary with our medical system, is that they believe that a child going through very natural questions of puberty, challenges, heartbreak, shame, frustration, young people are being bombarded with social media content. Much of it is, I mean, I heard some crazy stories that certain Um, trans influencers are getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to influence to young people. There's tons of money going into the content creation to encourage young people to transition. And then if you are a child who is going through puberty, more often than not, you see some of these influencers, you will immediately ask yourself, and these influencers are like, this lifestyle is fabulous. Like I am just finally happy. And like a child sees them, they're like, that's what I want. I want to be finally happy. And so then it goes through this whole process of that's the only because children are developing in their thought processes, and it's not the most mature thought processes all the time, and so then they think that is the only thing that is going to make me happy, so then it becomes a fixation.
Yeah. And a lot of these children are also on the autistic spectrum, but they have like a similar learning disability, like ADHD, for example. So they already have
Yeah.
a habit of fixating. But for me, it started very similar. You know, I was about 12 years old when I first like started encountering like the transgender community, just like in the wild on social media.
Yeah.
And like I heard the word a few times before. I actually thought it was kind of a funny concept when I was a little bit younger than that. But seeing it for the first time just right in front of me kind of like really changed my perspective of things, because these were kids who were very similar to me. I personally was not really interested in like the influencers around it. Like I preferred to interact with or just like follow people who had like smaller accounts because it felt more familiar. But they reminded me so much of myself in so many different ways. A lot of these people were artistic, they were creative, they had a unique fashion sense. Um, they were very individual. They wanted to set themselves apart from the other people around them. A lot of them grew up feeling like they didn't really fit in for
Mhm.
whatever reason. Many of them were called tomboys or effeminate boys growing up.
Mhm.
Um, and it just something about like seeing these other kids my age just going through this and starting out as these awkward kids who some of them were in really bad situations. They were being abused at home.
Yeah,
They're being
bullied at
bullied really hard at
school.
school.
I was
Which
bullied.
I was bullied. I was totally
Yeah,
bullied.
totally, me too. Yeah.
Um, and they seemed to find this sense of happiness and wholeness, and they seemed to shine even brighter as they like talked about like discovering their identity and finding affirmation and cutting their hair short and dressing more like the opposite sex, and
Mhm.
people approving of this and calling them by their preferred names and pronouns and everything. And eventually many of them went on to undergo like different medical procedures like the hormones or the surgeries.
What are the names of some of these hormones?
um well, for me, I went on a drug. I ended up going on a drug called Lupron, which I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I've read about
It's
Lupron.
it's
Yeah.
so it's
It's a
been used as like a cancer drug,
Mhm.
for usually for like late stage reproductive cancers, I think, and for conditions like endometriosis.
Mhm.
Um, but it's also been used as a chemical castration agent,
For
and they
women.
for no chemical castration agent for
For
sex offenders,
for
for sex
sex
offenders of
offenders.
children. But they
Oh,
stopped. A lot of facilities have stopped using this drug to castrate those sex offenders because it's been deemed too cruel for use in that population,
mhm.
which is very interesting because we're using it on perfectly healthy children like me. Um,
Wow.
I also about a month later went on testosterone. Um,
Wow.
it was I think it was testosterone cypionate. So it was in like I think like an injectable gel, and I took it intramuscularly, pretty much weekly.
Mhm.
And the final intervention that I had was I had an elective double mastectomy to
Oh,
surgically remove my breasts.
yeah.
And this was not just any like cancer related mastectomy. This It's a modified version of that, which is even more invasive. It removes different parts of the tissue. Um, and they don't care as much about like reducing scarring. So you often see patients who have like big, massive
I've
scars.
seen some of the images. It's a
Yeah,
giant line.
yes. And in my case, I
Yeah.
had a type of incision called double incision with nipple grafts, meaning that they cut into each breast, but they also grafted the nipples. So they like took them back off.
Oh,
They took them off, and then the way that it was. So the surgeon described it to me, and they probably simplified it a little bit, even because I was 15 years old. I was a teenager at the time that I underwent this last procedure. They would like do like a controlled scrape on the chest, in an area so that they would reposition the areolas into a more masculine looking position.
oh,
And there's a lot of
yeah,
complications that are associated with
of
this.
course.
A lot of
Yeah,
people have their grafts just fall off within
yeah.
the first few weeks or months. Thankfully, mine didn't. And for the most part, I've healed fairly well from the surgery, but I have had some complications.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that. It's I've seen the pictures, um, and I'm like, that doesn't look like what my friends got because I'm at
No,
that
it's
age
completely
now
different. It's radically
where
different.
my friends are getting mastectomies, double mastectomies because of breast cancer. And it's usually under the breast,
Mhm.
and they try to leave as much tissue as they can.
Uh-huh.
Um, but this is not that. I mean, what you've just described to me, I have never heard anything like that in my life.
Right. I think that like the grafting of the areolas came from something that they actually sometimes do, in the case of women whose cancer has like not spread to their nipples, and they like
Yes.
graft onto like another area of the body, such as the leg, for example,
Hmm.
for preservation of the tissue. Um, but if you watch videos of how they perform these surgeries, even just the way they perform it looks so careless.
Oh
It's
God.
so careless. They don't really, I feel like just in general, like there is no real care as
Hmm.
to the long-term outcomes of the patients who go through this.
Well, and they're doing it under the guise of when you wake up and you heal, you will be a man and you won't be a woman
Right.
anymore.
I mean, so one of the things that one of the things that really convinced me that I was transgender and like an actual male, I believe that I actually was male
Hmm.
because of this theory of brains being sexed. Um, so it's true that men and women have differently structured brains.
Hmm.
But there was this idea going around at the time while I was in the community that there is like a biological basis to being transgender. And some people have brain patterns that are more like the opposite sex. This has been disproven since, but to like my
Yeah.
little like pre-adolescent brain, it was like, so I'm not just a tomboy. This is naturally just who I am. And
Hmm.
I'm actually a young man. I just happen to have like the sexual developments of a woman. And that's why I feel this
Well,
distress around my body. It's not just me going through puberty. It's not
yeah.
just me being like a normal awkward teen. It's because there's actually something fundamentally different around me. And now I have a fix. Now I can finally understand not only myself, but also how I can become better, happier, and healthier.
That is so awful that they were telling young people that the brains were in the wrong body. I mean, that's that just is such a slap in the face for every hard-headed, stubborn, hardworking, competitive woman. Like, look, even Sex in the City, which was the handbook really for my generation of women, like being like independent women, and we're going to like have careers, and we're gonna have boyfriends, and it's just this like glamorous way of thinking about being a young
Modern
woman.
life, basically.
And even in that one, Carrie Bradshaw has her gay husband.
Mhm.
right? And it's
I've never actually watched it, so I feel like I'm like, there's
I
some stuff that I'm missing here.
yeah, I know. Sorry. I'm like definitely aging myself right now, but yeah, and but you know, Sex in the City, that was
Mhm,
Carrie Bradshaw has very famously had her gay husband. And it was a friendship because there was this compatibility in the friendship.
mhm.
Like Carrie would help oh my God, what was his name? The bald guy with glasses.
There's like an actual
She
term for
would
that, right? Like a lavender marriage or something?
I don't see all of this stuff became overly literal for your generation. For my generation, it was just like funny, haha, you know. And then for your generation, it all got very literal and scary and medical.
No, it's so
And then
frustrating.
it was
Like,
just
I've been in the game for so many years. Like, I've been like, I was once a part of like all these communities, right? And it's like, I'm like 4 years out of leaving it, maybe 5. And it's like, there's so many new terms that I can't even keep up with.
like what are some of them or that you've
Like a
heard of
lot of the like
recently?
gender terms, I can't even like keep up with them. Like all the like gender and sexuality terms. Like
Uh-huh.
I've seen some crazy ones out there. Like what is an epicene? What is a nutrius? A lot of it I can't even pronounce because it's so crazy. It's so out there.
Wow. Oh, Chloe, scary. I'm scared. I'm like, I mean, it's just it's like where are all the mentors? And like maybe this is my generation's fault. Like where are we for these kids and why are we so disjointed from being able to reach them with some degree of sanity and support that is the right kind of support so that these kids can get through puberty not being preyed on, right? Because this is predatory. Like some of these, I mean, the total cost of what you underwent must have been close to $1 million, right? Like all
Probably. I
in.
mean, the thing about that is I don't actually know like the cost of like my own treatments over those 4 years because all of it was pretty much covered by the state of California or
The
by my
state of
by
California
insurance. It's a
insurance
law
paid
in
for it.
California for all these all of the main treatments, the blockers, the cross sex hormones, and the breast and genital surgeries to be covered
Oh
by
my
insurance
God.
companies.
There's a
So other
law
than like
requiring
copays,
that.
my mom and dad only had to like pay like $50 to $100 each for appointments. That was about it.
And
So
it's
they basically incentivize patients to go through this. But going back to mentors, I feel like that's a large thing that my generation in general has just lacked. And I don't know all exactly where that comes from or why that is, or why there's such a rift between um, Gen Z, maybe even like millennials and previous generations.
mhm.
But there definitely is that sort of lack of mentorship from I've seen it in I've seen it
Well,
in my
would you
friends
have
growing up.
look, yeah.
They just had no relationship really with their parents beyond like being
Oh,
told like they had to keep their grades up or like
yeah.
keeping up with their responsibilities, but they would
Mhm.
have really no time with them, no quality time, most of my friends.
Mhm.
And I feel like a large part of that probably is that just for I feel like for a long time now, our culture has prioritized our work lives and our careers over family. So there's so many families out there that are focusing on work and their
Mhm.
careers.
Mhm.
And many of them have to because they in order to even keep food on the table, right? But
Mhm.
that means that they don't really get the time that they need to um with their children, their young
Yeah.
ones and the loved ones. And I've like heard
Do
this
you think you
expressed so
would
many
have
times by
been
my friends.
do you think yeah, no, I hear you. But do you think given the power of social media, the more that I learn about it's not just the content that's coming through, but it's actually the lights. It's that blue light. Um
Yes, that's a part of it. So
yeah,
there's
it's very
also
addicting. It's very dopamine causing and again, it's not just the content because I have a device called a daylight computer that has no blue light.
mm,
I don't get the same weird hit of dopamine
Wait,
from
so
it.
is it like a is it like a color screen then, or?
Yeah, it's an innovation in display technology where they take out all the blue light and they actually illuminate the screen differently. It actually looks like magical Harry Potter paper.
So do
it's a new
colors still
startup
show up? Do
out of this
colors still
area.
show up accurately then?
There's no colors.
Oh, I see. Okay. So
We're
it's like
working on
a
putting color into it right now.
okay.
But it's like different shades of gray at the current time. It's kind
So
of
it's like
like
an ebook reader.
it's like, yeah, it's like a advanced Kindle. But it's really cool because it's a tablet, so I can watch stuff on it. But yeah, the color is out of it, so you don't get that same dopamine hit. And I realized that the difference is significant. And if you have a developing young brain that's getting these constant, like artificial light in general, and then specifically the flashing light that comes out of our phones,
Uh-huh. The refresh.
yeah, it has this like flicker to it almost.
Yep.
And that's literally like hypnotizing us a little bit. Like it's getting content into our brain while
Yep.
also igniting this massive chemical process
It is
that
almost
gets us a
hypnotic in
dopamine hit.
nature now
Yeah,
that I think about it. But
it's
yeah,
real
that's
addiction.
another thing that's like causing like the generational divide is that a lot of
Humans
like
can't compete with that
yeah,
with a teenager.
yeah. I mean,
Like a human mentor
I'm a
can't
part
compete with
of one
that.
of the first few generations that has basically grown up with the phone in their hand,
Mhm.
with social media and like this entire the internet is just it's this massive information highway
Mhm.
that you can just access at any time now. Like the
I mean,
the
I'm
people who
totally
came before
addicted to
us, they
some of
did
it,
not have
yeah.
that. At least not as accessibly as they or overwhelmingly as they do now.
Mhm. No, no, I mean, look, I can tell you what my teenage I remember my teenage years very, very well, and I had a pager for a while that would just beep, beep, and we'd send pager code to each other in numbers. It was just this plastic device that you
Uh-huh.
could send numbers to each other,
Yeah.
and it'd be like, "Call this number," but, like, it wouldn't even say, "Call this number," it would just send you the number. It's hard to explain. We've gotta bring back some of this retro
I've
techno.
never I know what pages are, but I've never
Have
actually
you
used one.
seen one? Like,
Yeah.
live? You've seen it, but okay, so but you've never well, I don't know why you'd use one. Um, and then there was the Nokia phone, and very famously, you could, like, change the screen
Mhm.
or the cover on it, so you could put, like, a pink cover or a sparkly silver cover. I still remember I had a pink and a sparkly silver one, and you could take it apart.
Those are the super tough ones, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, it was like a brick, like, you could throw it, it'd be fine.
Uh-huh.
Um
You ever like use your phone in your bed and drop your phone on your face? That's like I feel like a Nokia, you definitely would not want to do that. I feel like that would be
No.
like
No, those old handy phones. And then there was the flip phone, but then I remember the first iPhone that came out, and I was in my 20s, and I was like, "Holy smokes." I was like, "This is insane." And I was like, "There's internet, and, like and it's a telephone, and there's
imagine growing up with that
games."
from a young age.
Well, this was before apps. So, like, apps really weren't, like, that interesting. I mean, the Facebook app I was pretty addicted to, um, but nothing like there is now. I mean,
That's one of the reasons why I've chosen not to use TikTok. Like I'm already like internet addicted a little bit. I've had one since I was like pretty young. I was definitely like a proto iPad kid, but for me, like it started with me using the computer instead. And
mm,
like early in my school years, it was like I could barely like socialize with other kids. So it was like the next best place for me was the internet. Um
yeah,
and then eventually like naturally that just evolved into like my phone usage during my adolescence. Um
yeah,
I mean, but like like I was like having like 24/7 access basically to
yeah,
the internet was already bad enough for me. But I feel like now for children who are growing up now, like I've seen in the past 10 years, I've seen a massive transformation in the content that is being put out. Like a lot of it,
yeah.
um, well, for one, everything is a lot more video focused. Like
Mhm,
back in the day, everything used to be like way more text focused or like image based.
mhm,
Now everything has to be in motion. The
mhm.
pictures have to everything has to be moving. You have to be able
And
to there has to be
edited,
yes,
sped up.
yes, sped up because like It's like
Mhm.
our attention spans have just been so hijacked. They're so short now.
Mhm.
Um, like, there's, like, a specific kind of content that
Yeah.
like, there's no, like, educational meaning to it. It's just for the purpose of
Yeah.
entertainment, but it's just so mindless. Like, there's, like, a term that my generation has come up with. We call it brain rot, and
Brain rot.
that's what a lot of kids are just consuming, like, for most of the day these days. Like, it's just
Yeah.
this mindless stuff that's, like, really stupid, and it's supposed to be funny, but, like, that's all they're putting into
Yeah.
their brains.
Are there many activists like you right now trying to create content to intersect children who are 12, 13, who are in the situation you were in? This is a time where I don't think a parent is gonna be able to get through to a kid who's getting this pro-transitioning content fed to them. So, that means it's gonna be you to get through
Right.
to these
I
kids
mean,
via content.
the thing that's sucking these children in is that so many of them, like, they might be kind of, like, awkward, like, um, artistic kids who think outside of the box, right? But at the end of the day, they still want somebody who's, like, young and like them to relate to,
Mhm.
and that's what brought me in, and I want to be that kind of figure for these children who have these feelings of confusion around themselves, not even necessarily in regards to their sex, just in general, because right now, like, in such a media and image-oriented world, it's hard to grow up, it's hard to find who you are.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, I mean, first of all, like, when I decided to first start speaking out, it just started with a little account on X, and I didn't really know what to expect from it, but I just hoped that, like, my message would get out there, to anybody who needed it, right? Because there was nobody
And you
like
did
me at
that
the
on
time.
your own just
Yeah.
as like a you would come through, you have detransition. Like, how
Even the
how do you
detransition was
even
all on my own.
really?
Yes. But,
Oh god,
e
you
I
are so tough.
yeah, I don't know how I got through it. I really don't know how I had the resilience to, because it was such a difficult time.
I
But
mean,
that was why I wanted to get my message out there to
yeah.
connect to other kids and young people who have been through this, because at the time there was nobody. But
Mhm.
then I was 17. That was 3 years ago about at this point.
Yeah.
And since then, there's been a massive explosion of other detransitioners, of other people who've regretted this or have otherwise been involved in this and hurt by this industry, by this ideology coming out, and making content, to help other people, um, prevent this from happening to them or to their family members ever again. And it's something that's definitely filled me with a lot of hope for our
Yeah.
world, for humanity. Because before, I used to think that I had no hope for myself, that I thought that I was going to, like, kill myself by 18 years old. I didn't think that I was gonna
Oh.
have, much of an adult life, that I already lost everything, and I thought that the world was just a terrible place.
Hmm.
But having had this opportunity to use everything that I went through, the bad and the good,
Yeah.
for the greater good of society,
Yeah.
having that chance and connecting with other people who share my values, who
Yeah.
share, um, just this
Mhm.
love for children, for truth, has
Mhm.
been just
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
it's very heartening.
I have a spiritual mentor, and she says to me time and time again, she says, "Look, God doesn't waste our pain." And there's life presents hardship. It's part of being human. And some of us get larger doses of it than others. But ultimately we have to strive for deep enjoyment and fulfillment. And that's where I think that also these um trans activists that are trying to encourage people to transition, they're missing the point on life, right? You can get pride and joy in oneself beyond sexual identity.
Right.
And
Beyond your body, beyond your appearance and the way that you present yourself, because I don't like, that's of course, like, your clothing and what you call
I mean,
yourself and present to other people is an
hiking
important
and
part
ping
of
pong
your
and
identity, but
pickleball.
it
I
also
mean,
comes from the things that you do,
there's
and these people are often not doing enough.
poetry, reading old books, vinyl records. I mean, I can come up with maybe 600 activities that one can do rather than fixating on transitioning and
Yeah,
your sex. And look, I understand that, there's this whole other side to it of connecting with other people and learning how to love and find a spouse. And and I understand that there is a huge void in content and material and support for young people in finding their partners. I mean, I'll say, I didn't necessarily have the messaging I got when I was a young person was, Nicole, go out and work and make a life for yourself. Don't rely on a man ever. And I was like, okay, I have to do this all by myself. And it's like, oh yeah, and your parents are going to help you, and it's going to be really hard to find mentors to help you. I was like, shoot, all right, I better get going. I got my first job at 12. And then I realized I needed to figure out what my career was going to be by the time I graduated pretty much from high school in order to really make it happen for myself.
hmm
And I had mentors along the way, coaches too. I was an athlete. I think sports are really important for young women, especially young, strong headed, competitive women, right? Like sports are a really great thing to focus on. Um, but it's really tough in this day and age to talk to a young person in those terms when they're yelling back at you and saying, you're anti-trans, you're hateful, you're a bigot, blah, 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 all the things that they say to
right.
anyone that even suggests that maybe transitioning is not for you.
Yep. I mean,
Right.
for somebody who,
Yeah.
especially like an older adult, right?
Yeah.
Who doesn't really understand how deep this goes. Like they don't understand like that their child is basically completely ideologically captured, and
Yeah.
behind their back, they're being told these things that are either not true or they have them like some grain of truth enough to them for it to be convincing, but is otherwise misleading.
Hmm.
So it's hard. It's hard to know how to navigate that. Um,
And also the way you are is beautiful, right? Like
right.
for a 13-year-old with acne whose body hurts and they're learning how to shave their legs and it's just not going well, right? And
I hate having to do that. I
yeah.
thought like there was like it was a dilemma. It was like I feel like I'm not pretty if I don't do it, but also like having to do it like so many times per week. It's like I feel like why am I doing this just for it to come back?
Yeah,
It's
and
just like all the grooming rituals of like being a young woman were just so overwhelming for me. And I started hitting puberty when I was about 8 years old. So it came very early
oh
for me. It
wow,
was
that
like,
is
I'm gonna be doing
early.
this for the rest of my life. I'd rather not. Like I just want to
Huh.
opt out of being a woman if this is what it's gonna be like, you know?
You mentioned a really good point, and I think this is why having you in the Maha movement is going to be very valuable. Early menses, you know, it used to be like 11, 12 years old, and now it's happening to young girls, like 8 and 9 and 10. And again, where is our medical organization saying this is a problem and we need to research it, right? Like
Right. Like
where is that concern that there are hormones and endocrine disruptors and things in our environment that are actually influencing um hormonal abnormal challenges. It's just, if you look at hormones and growth, they're constantly interacting with our environment.
yes.
Even vitamin D, people don't realize this. Vitamin D is a hormone, right? So you get it from being in the sunshine.
hmm
So imagine if your whole life is spent in front of a artificial screen, artificial lights, and you're not getting enough direct sunlight. Your hormones are going to be completely dysregulated. And children who are now iPad children, children who some of which are, on iPads as early as 1,
Yeah.
right? And the iPad is the babysitter. And by year after year after year, hundreds of hours later, when it's time for this beautiful young person to go through puberty,
Their hormones have already been dysregulated
Their
from the get-go.
hormones are wrecked,
Yep.
right? And especially if they're not getting enough outdoor time. So again, like this is something for our society to really keep in mind. We can't just blame the trans influencers for it. Like the trans influencers are the things that the kids are being drawn to
Mhm.
because it's the thing that gives them a sense of belonging and dopamine, but there's
Yes.
already just an underlying issue.
Even those influencers
Yeah.
often, I think most of them, we should worry about them too because they are the ones who are falling victim to this. They're the ones
Yeah.
who also are being experimented on. And sure, they're they're also encouraging other people to do it and spreading the
Yeah.
word of this, but they can't help it because they're also being caught in this fallacy
Yeah.
of transition.
I think that's a very empathetic approach to it because, I will say, like, I've spent a lot of time with conservatives recently. I was, formerly very heavily liberal, and then I left the Democratic Party because it just seemed crazy to me what was happening over there, and also just incompetence, just governance like focus on waters and roads and the role of government. And they weren't doing that. They were doing all this other weird ideology. So I was like,
And we've
huh,
seen with recent events how
yeah.
where that incompetence has led us. Like the entirety of
Our
basically the
our
southern part of the state is
our
burned
state
down.
is literally on fire. Yeah, exactly. So then I left, became an independent. Our campaign merged with Trump's, and then the next thing I know, I'm in this like world of conservatives, and I have never really spent time with conservatives in my life. And they're the ones that are like really pushing back against the trans agenda, and they're like, this is real, this is wrong. The religious right is like, there's something very satanic and ungodly about it. Why are they doing this to young children's bodies? They're like cutting, like the idea of like cutting a child, like to the religious right, they're like, that is satanic. Like, don't treat a child's beautiful God-given body like
Mhm.
that. And I've been listening to them, I'm hearing them, I'm following, I've been seeing the stats, I've been meeting. You're the first person who's detransitioned that I've met, but I've followed many of the accounts, as well as some of the lawsuits because there's lawsuits now as well. And I was like, wow, this is like a whole thing. And people on the right will point to the influencers and the ideology pushers, and they don't really have a lot of empathy. They're really like, those are the bad guys, right?
And
And in the medical
there
industry,
often
those
is
are
an
the bad
element.
guys.
Some of these people are legitimately groomers,
Oh,
and they deserve to be held accountable for what they're doing. But many of them are just victims, and we have to look to where this is actually coming from.
yeah. Do you think we need to hold the groomers accountable?
I mean, it depends on what we mean by groomer and by holding them accountable. Like if they're like trafficking drugs to children, which there is like a large network of transgender activists who are actually doing that behind the backs of parents to their
Oh
kids.
my God.
Even in states where it's illegal, which in either case it's legal to share your prescriptions, and also it's just incredibly morally wrong
Hmm.
to allow a child to disrupt their development like that. In any case, um, there is like actual sexual abuse in the transgender community as well, which is something that really needs to be addressed. It is unfortunately a
Hmm.
huge problem that's happening, and it's something that I and many of my friends have experienced.
Oh God. That makes me sick to my stomach. Those people need to be held accountable.
Yes,
Those people
yes,
need to be in prison.
they are the ones who need to be held accountable for sure.
Yeah.
But outside of the community,
How are these predators finding these kids?
um, a lot of these children, because their parents, most people of older generations don't really fully understand either how the internet or social media work or the dangers of being on them, especially when you are a vulnerable child or adolescent.
Hmm.
A lot of these kids will just put themselves out there. They'll put all their information out there, and they're in these communities, right? Like, you,
Where are
like as
these
out as an
online
outside observer, you
communities?
can often you can see that these children are suffering. They'll often talk very openly about like the pain that they're going through at home, like with
Mhm.
their parents, with the people around them, and to a predator, that's like you basically found your pumpkin patch. Like these kids are ripe for the picking for you. Like
Ugh,
it's become because it's such a vulnerable population, because like these kids are just putting themselves out there trying to connect with people. Like it's unfortunately it's made a gateway between them
yeah.
and potential predators.
Is it on TikTok? Is it on Reddit? Like
It's on
where
pretty much any like major social media platform you can think of.
really
Yeah.
it's all over the place. Do you think the social media platforms um should have watchdogs looking out for kids on them and being able to identify who these predators are?
I mean, I think that they have that to an extent with like moderators, but even like
Yeah.
there's no like people like actual like watchdogs like looking out for kids really
Yeah.
specifically. Um and it's like on Instagram specifically, there's like a really bad problem with like kids basically being pimped out. Like a lot of them will like open themselves up to being sexually abused, or they're being like
Mm.
pimped out by their parents, or they're like child models, and like people will actually like post like straight up like porn. Like I can't even call it pornography because it's a content of children being abused, and like these things like will be reported
Yeah.
like these things you like thousands of
This
people
is
could be
a big
reporting them and they won't be
problem.
taken down.
Really?
I
Meanwhile,
think that the best
I
watchdog
talk
for
about vaccines and they take that down right away.
yeah, it's really
It's
ridiculous. There needs to be a
ridiculous.
major overhaul just in general with
Wow.
content moderation on Instagram. But that's why I feel like the best watchdog that a child can have
Mhm.
is their parent or their guardian. You have to be the one who is vigilant and watching out for them and learning about these platforms so that you can impart that knowledge onto your children. And I don't think that I think that ideally children should not be using social media just in general, but I've also seen some people like in their late teens like using it like for like to build their own platforms for good,
Yeah.
right? I think that it's possible to like prevent your child from using it for a while,
Mhm.
but then also guide them on how to properly use the internet as a tool for
Yeah.
learning and for interaction and building important connections as well.
Yeah.
Because if you don't teach your child about it at all, if you just never let them have it
Mhm.
ever, then they're going to become an adult one day and they're going to they're not really going to fully understand like how to properly use it or like what to avoid with it.
Mhm.
And I also just feel like as the world becomes more technologically advanced and focused, like that is like a massive uh skill tree
Mhm.
that they're going into adulthood not having.
Yeah.
I think it's important for everybody to develop.
Yeah. It also strikes me I remember being young and they were, the biggest trouble with high schoolers when I was growing up was, don't drink and drive. And I remember they put a car that had been in an accident. They like dumped it right in front of the high school. So you'd have to walk by it. And there was like hair and blood and it was like horrible.
Mm,
Like because they really wanted to scare us from drinking and driving. And I have to say it
it's a good
worked.
tactic.
It's a good tactic.
I think that's
And
exactly what we have to do with the gender thing too.
yeah, it is a responsibility for young people to understand the reality of what is going on, whether it be maybe a short documentary or do you go and speak at schools? Is that
I
like
do
something you
actually.
do?
I've been doing a few
Yeah.
tours at different colleges and even with high school
High
students
school
over the
students.
past 2 years, basically.
I mean, it seems like you almost have to start as early as like eighth grade or seventh grade, right?
Well, yeah, that was when it started for me. I think that's the pre-adolescent to young adults
Mm-hmm.
stage. Those are the ages that are most important to reach with this message. Like for
Yeah.
years, I'd been frustrated with the activism that I was doing, right? Because like sure, like I was having wins with like legislation and like reaching like older populations in different ways, and affecting the culture with older people.
Mm-hmm.
But for a while, like I was just finding I was having such a difficult time trying to get out to people my age and younger,
Yeah.
who they're the ones who really need to hear this because they're the ones who are dealing with it the absolute
No,
most.
it is. It's the 12-year-olds.
Yep.
It's the 12-year-olds. Like it starts at 11, 12. By the time it's 13, it like really, boils up. And then 14, 15, like if you don't redirect by that point, it's like run away. And then
Mm.
you have the medical profession who's like, this child is depressed. They're only going to feel better if they're in the right body. Right. I don't know where the hell that came from in the medical field, but it is really crazy to me.
I think the idea of born in the right or wrong body comes from that theory of brain sex that I was talking about earlier. I
Mhm.
could be wrong. But all it comes down to is just these people's feelings. Like this is the only area of medicine really that is
Mhm.
focused at its core on feelings. The
Yeah.
entire basis of the treatment is that is suicide prevention. The bar is so low. It's like, okay, they didn't kill themselves, so it worked out. Meanwhile, these people are like having dwindling quality of life. Um, like you're living a lie every day, basically. There's a
Mhm.
lot of just psychological and emotional pressure that
Yeah.
comes with that. And like any reminder of your birth sex, depending on the individual, can be incredibly just triggering. Like it can send you into a downward spiral.
Oh,
And like they're like in terms of their physical health, like these you're not
yeah.
supposed to be on massive doses of cross-sex hormones for an extended period of time. And they're having people on these for decades, for pretty much their entire lives.
Yeah.
Not to mention like the other pharmaceuticals that they often use, like the puberty blockers. People say they're reversible and they're safe. They are not. These are castration agents. They leave you with bone and
Mm.
joint issues and so much more. And the surgeries, like you lose perfectly healthy parts of your body. Like I'm grateful that all I lost was my breasts and not my menstrual cycle or my uterus or anything like that. Because these people, like once you go
They'll
past the
take
point,
those
yeah,
too? Like some surgeries will
some surgeries, yeah. Well, I
I've
don't know
heard
how much
about
you
I've
know
I've
about
heard
like the genital surgeries, but there's different kinds, including
yeah.
like removing the ovaries or the uterus or the testes in men. Sometimes like even like complete removal in men of like the
Wow.
penis, like all of the sexual organs in that area. Or usually they'll do like a combination of those things.
And they're
While
doing
also like
yeah.
they'll surgically sterilize and they'll also like using the genitalia that is there, making basically a simulation of what the opposite sex has. It's, of course, it's like it's not a real functioning penis or vagina. There's no really sexual sensation or anything. It's just something that is completely non-functional. And like
Oh,
they'll
yeah.
like we're not thinking about how that actually affects the patient long term
Yeah.
when they're like researching like the regret or satisfaction rates of these patients.
Mhm.
They'll ask like, are you happy? They'll ask, which is like completely subjective, um subjective, right?
Mhm.
Like happiness could mean anything and it's fleeting. It's an emotion.
Mhm.
It's supposed to go away. And
Yeah.
like they'll ask questions like, do you feel more like a man or a woman? Like,
Mhm.
and like if you've had a mastectomy or if you've had like your sex organs removed, it's like, yeah, I don't feel like, of course I don't
I mean,
feel any more feminine.
I'll go get a mani-pedi and I'm like, "Oh, I feel like a woman now." It's
Yeah, and
like
like that's fun, but like
but
it's
it's
a
like
feeling that goes away, and
yeah.
we shouldn't be encouraged by doctors to chase that. I believe
Yeah.
I believe
No,
gender
that's a
dysphoria to
very
basically be a
flaw.
form of
That's
body
very
dysmorphia
flawed.
because you're believing things about your body or about your sex that
Mhm.
are not real. There is nothing wrong with your body the way that it was made, and you not are not actually a man or a woman. You're just the way that you're made. And these treatments are not actually going to make you into the opposite sex. They do not change your sex
Well, the
because
thing
sex is an immutable thing.
yeah.
So the very premise of it
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
completely a fallacy.
Yeah, and to do this to children, like, I mean, I felt like I was becoming a woman throughout my teenage years. And sorry to use so much of my example, but that's all I know, right? Is like what my
And really,
experience
it's what a
was.
lot of women experience.
Yeah, and it takes time. And like by the time you're 18, you're then like according to law, you're an adult, but you're still very much a child,
I'm
right?
20 and I know I am not all the way there yet. Oh my gosh.
20
I hope
is
this is not
very
my peak.
young. Oh, 20 is, I mean, no, I mean, 20 definitely was not my peak. I think that I'm going to be 40 this year and I feel like a grown woman, but you have your whole 20s to make all of these mistakes and, trying to figure out who you are and what you care about and what you're good at.
Mhm.
You try to find someone to love. And sometimes you get it wrong.
Right.
I like
And by transitioning a child, you're taking away their opportunity to do all of that,
They're
like in
taking
a
away
healthy
all of
manner.
it, yeah,
You're
and all
you're
of their
you're robbing
sensory
them of
experiences, yeah.
their sexual function. You're robbing them of their ability to experience physical and
Yeah,
emotional sexual pleasure because you are sterilizing them. You're
mhm,
circumventing their healthy sexual development into adulthood, and
yeah,
you're robbing them of their ability to have children
right,
potentially, which is the entire reason why sex exists. It's not only like a means of us experiencing pleasure, but it's also how we continue our species and connect with our married partner.
mhm,
It's one of I mean I from like having spoken to like some of my like older mentors that I met throughout the years. They say, like, it's one of the best parts of life, and you're robbing a child who has no understanding of it.
yeah. No, becoming a mother
Yes.
was like, for me, it was like this incredible personal it was like I was coming into being, right? I was coming into being as a mother, and I was going from like a child of my mother to then becoming a mother myself with this being that you know looks like me and just it's the most magical thing in the world. And that love, there's no greater love in the world than the love you feel when you become a parent. There's
And your
no
body and
greater
soul
love.
just makes it happen.
Yeah.
It's incredible how natural it is, and we've
Yeah.
really demonized motherhood in general, but also, like, even just, like, the act of carrying
Mhm.
and giving birth. That was all the negative messaging that I got from other women, and even,
Yeah.
like, from sometimes from boys or men about just what mothers or women in general, or about like the changes that happen to the body during
Mhm.
pregnancy and birth,
Yeah.
and and some of the burdens that then come with that, like made me like never want to do it until like late in my adolescence.
Yeah. But that's normal.
It is really normal. Like
That's
it's a thing that we've
yeah.
been doing for
That's
for millennia, and we've been able like our species. We're still here. We're bigger than ever. Like,
well, our population's actually shrinking at an
well,
alarming
yeah.
rate, but it's in part because, there have been failures in how our biology reacts in this environment.
Mhm.
And so
I worry
we've
about
got
my
to
fertility
address
a lot,
that.
especially like not only because of the things that have happened to me,
Mhm.
um, but also because of like all of these things that we don't know are poisoning us.
Mhm.
That's one thing that's like really deeply terrifying to me.
Yeah, but that's something you can learn about. I mean, that's something I think a lot of people are out there paying attention to and they're having success with. And as long as we have sovereign
Hmm.
rights of the individual and, children can make it through childhood without being preyed on by
Yep,
these industries that are irreparably harming children, there is a shot. Our species has a shot.
I think so. I think there's a lot of hope in our future.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of friends though who have been through all of this and still been able to mother, father, natural children of their own. So it
Yeah.
does give me a lot of help. It does give me a lot of hope. And
Yeah.
you're right that
The body's
the
resilient.
first line of
Nature's
defense
resilient.
here that we have to tackle is the grooming of our children, and then we
Yeah.
have to tackle the rest. But
Is
Before
there an
we
organization that you'd like to share that is taking on groomers head on, that is trying to find who they are and turn them over to authorities?
um that is a good question. As far as I know, I don't know of like I know there like are some like individuals out there who will like honeypot, like kind of like Chris Hansen style.
Mm-hmm.
Um in regards to like like sexual groomers of children, but I don't know of
Yeah.
any organizations that are like specifically targeting like ideological grooming of children or like just like groups in general that are doing that.
Yeah.
So
It's wrong. It's
it
really,
is.
really wrong. And
I
it
think
has to
that's
end.
that's all of our responsibilities.
Yeah.
I think
And
that goes for all of us. Like
hmm
I think that we should have a culture of if you see something, say something,
yeah.
get involved. Like
Yeah.
don't just be a bystander.
And grooming is wrong.
Yes, absolutely.
Grooming children is deeply wrong. Well, Chloe Cole, you are an inspiration. You are so strong. You are so tough. I applaud you and I thank you for going out there and really fighting for the rights of children to just get through childhood, to have all of the things that life has in promise for these children, helping kids get through those moments of really just trying to see through the deception, and come out on top. And I hope that you continue to do this work, and that those out there are who are also inspired to join you in this work as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me here and for this discussion. I feel like this is definitely one of the most like intellectually stimulating discussions I've had on camera in a long time. So it's really quite it's been quite a refreshing experience actually. And
Oh,
I'm hoping that beyond the whole um war on gender ideology, I can branch out into other areas and continue to help the world beyond it.
you're smart and you're brave and you're strong. You can do whatever you put your mind to.
Thank you.
Thank you.